Hey, it's producer Rob. We've got Jeff and we've got Bart over here.
Guys.
Thanks for tuning in. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, thank you very much. Yes. If you're listening to us right now, that means you're not seeing us, but you can see us if you want to. Just go to Jeep Beach Official on YouTube, and you'll be able to find out everything that we've done in the past, most of them anyway.
That's a scary thought.
Videos. Yeah. And if you are watching this and you want the audio portion of it, all your favorite podcast platforms will cover that.
Yes.
So, ready for the show?
Ready.
You ready?
Yes,
we're ready.
Thanks for tuning in. Here we go.
It's now time for another episode of the Off-Road Toolbox. A Jeepers guide to everything off-road. Powered by Best Price Trailers.
Okay, Bart, I've got a question for you.
Go ahead.
When did modifications of Jeeps really start?
Almost the day they were made.
Really?
So Jeep came out in 1940. The contract got awarded in 1941. And in 1941, the Jeeps going overseas were modified.
How did they modify them?
It's actually a really great story. It goes back to special warfare. So if people don't know the history, the Special Air Service, SAS, started as a ruse. So let's get back to World War II. War's going on. We're not in it yet, but we're selling 4x4 trucks. We're actually it. For actually saving the world was with our vehicles. So our 4-wheel drive trucks were going all over the place. The British were using them. And then in North Africa, it became a real issue because there was only a few roads, and everything else was people driving off-road.
It's all desert.
It's all desert. So what's kind of neat, gets even better, is there were British explorers that had been driving the desert looking either for archaeological or for oil.
Really?
So we had this whole group that had been driving the desert up until when the war broke out. Then when the war breaks out, they needed 4-wheel drive vehicles. Right. So then they had this one group which was called the Long Range Desert Group, and it was a small group of misfits. I'm just going to tell you, it was misfits who were going around in vehicles, and they were watching the Germans and Italians, and whenever they could, they would attack, and they had our Chevrolet trucks. And so the British, in their infinite wisdom in North Africa, decided they're going to do a ruse, and their intelligence guy leaked out that there's a new commando unit called the Special Air Service. So,
okay.
These guys, there was 50 of them. They went out on a parachute mission, and a storm came up. So out of the 50, less than 25 survived. They got blown all over the place.
Right.
So when they landed, they had to they're supposed to land and blow up some airfields, the Germans and Italians, to stop the attack on convoys. And the Special Air Service, these commandos under this thing, the ones that survived were hiking out, and they actually came across the Long Range Desert Group guys.
So then they hook up with them?
So then they said, well, they got rescued. And then, and if they went back, they didn't want this Captain Sterling didn't want to get disbanded. So he goes, what do you guys do? And they learned from these guys. And these guys could drive everywhere. It's daytime, nighttime. They could read terrain. They were just masters of off-road driving and navigation. So that was pretty cool. So this captain goes, hey, he goes, I don't want to get broken back up, and you guys are limited in numbers, and I still have missions to complete. So they went out and did their raids with the trucks in doing this thing. And it caught the attention of Winston Churchill.
So he leaned on them to do some...
So then he actually even sent purportedly his son to go see what these guys did, and said these guys were unbelievable. And then that's where it went from being the SAS, from being a ruse to actually becoming the elite commando units they were. When they got Winston Churchill's blessing and signed orders, it was pretty neat, because the signed orders allowed him to go get whatever he needed. So that was and he had these like blank orders, and they went, and one of the first things they got were the new Jeeps coming in, because now it's 1941. Right. We are sending thousands of Jeeps to our allies, whether it was the British, not the Italians, the British, the Australians, and the Russians were getting these Jeeps. And these guys quickly got the Jeeps and started saying, ooh, we're going to make some modifications like they did with the truck. So some of the modifications they did was a radiator reservoir. Like we think of today, a radiator reservoir standard. But I remember growing up as a kid, my first couple of cars didn't have a radiator reservoir.
No, we didn't have it.
Well, they understood the heat of the desert and what it did, so they needed a collection can. So that's where, if you'll see in some of the pictures that we have, you'll see that they cut the fins out, the grill. They cut some of the grill out to get better airflow, and then they put in the reservoir, and then they started making all these modifications. And it was everything from snorkels to tires to traction boards to, of course, the weaponry. And they actually took out front bumpers, but then they put on recovery gear, the predecessor or the farm jack or the high lift jack, the jacks they use.
So in reality, they had to be self-sufficient. So all this stuff was probably stuff that they've seen, used, or...
So from the earlier explorers, from the guys before them, using, the metal sand tracks, or traction boards.
Right.
How to do recoveries, how to air down, carrying spare tires. And it was interesting is these guys would travel, up to 1,500 miles to go do a mission. Like, so 700 miles out, 700 miles back, and then... And so then the Jeep became actually their thing. And if you look at all the stuff they did, so they started modifying the Jeep, which could only do top speed of 65 miles an hour.
But still, back then, that was fast.
It was very fast. And so they would actually drive at nighttime. And so if you've never driven in the desert, it can be very deceiving. And if you don't know your terrain, it can swallow your vehicle. I mean, you can find some soft spots and everything else. So the Jeeps became the Raiders, and then their trucks became the support vehicles. And so then what they would do, they would drive hundreds of miles behind enemy lines to an airfield, drive down the airfield, and just shoot up all the planes and then leave, and try to get back, because then afterwards, it only took them a couple times. And then, the Italian and German, Air Force were looking for these guys. Right. So then when they're looking for these guys, if you'll see some of the pictures they had to start adding more and more guns. Right. So before it was just shooting up the planes, but now is shooting what plane is trying to shoot you back.
50 cal.
So everything. They actually had everything, and it was just so neat the way they did it.
So this kind of brings me back to the TV show. What was it?
Rat Patrol.
Rat Patrol.
Rat Patrol. It was somewhat like that, but
loosely based, I'm sure.
Loosely based, yes. The British actually started all this. So then the Americans, when we entered the war and helped in North Africa, first thing we looked at is what they did to all the Jeeps. So the Americans especially the Americans in the Pacific, are like, oh no. Why do the Brits get all the guns? So they actually made all the like I said, it started with air cleaners, the snorkels, the radiator reservoirs, tires, spare tires, traction boards. Interesting thing was the jerry can, the gas can called the jerry can was called that because of the Germans.
Yes.
The German gas can or fuel can was far superior than American or British. Ours were just tin.
Right.
And real bad. Where
these
these
were steel.
They're steel. They could be carried by one or two persons. Everything set up about that gas can was for function, speed and function. So then what did the British do? They grabbed every one of their cans they could find. If you look at all their pictures, it's all the confiscated, all the jerry cans they used, and they would carry plenty of fuel to do it. It's just interesting that and then afterwards. Instead of carrying, actually, they put in 2 saddle tanks. Yeah,
is this the one?
That's one. Look at all those fuel tanks in there. Think about that. Look at all the stuff that they did. They lost the windshield. They folded the windshield down. They put in like a sun compass because a compass wouldn't work because of the metal.
Right.
So they had to make like a compass they could use, and then use the sun and line everything up, and then that would give them their bearings to go.
And this picture here has the cans, the jerry
cans in it. Yeah,
on the back.
Yep.
Yeah, and then later on, they decided that they started making twin 15-gallon and then twin 30 gallons plus because at that time you had a small gas tank underneath the driver's seat.
Right.
Real small gas tank, and and that's what they needed was that stuff. So,
man, the history of what everything that happened has played into what we're doing today.
Oh, so. It's a lot of lessons learned. Everything. So they're modifying Jeeps, and then when we come home from the war, we kind of get away from things. So we got away from our driving, some of our recovery, our gear, all that stuff. So
Basically, it's turned into, I mean, I always say it's like a Barbie and Ken Jeep. You know, I mean, you could, because, you know, when you were kids
Yes.
and your
Right.
sister or you had a Ken doll,
Yes.
you know, you could interchange all this stuff. That's
Yes.
what they could do.
G.I. Joe, too.
G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
G.I. Joe had a Jeep.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
I had his Jeep.
So it was just so much. Again, it's, you know, here's what they did, and the Jeep came out and was a very capable vehicle, and the next thing you know is it's, you know, they take it to the next level
Yeah, and
out of necessity and using their just, you know, what works, what doesn't work.
just looking at that, and remember that we had the seals here for
Yep.
Jeep Beach.
Yep.
Seeing some of the stuff that was on
They're side by
their
side.
side by side,
Yes.
reminds me a lot of that picture of that Jeep,
So-
because all the things that they could put on.
Talking about this picture here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, I mean, that's the size of their. Actually, that's a little bit smaller than their side by side.
Oh yeah,
You know, this is all the stuff they had to do. I
but
mean,
it was all capable.
it was all very capable.
They held what, 3 or 4 man team
Yes.
on each one, I think it
Yes.
was.
Yep.
So
Same thing back then. It was 3 and 4 men.
Yep.
Team, and it's just unbelievable of the ingenuity, and then everything's a lessons learned, and then of course when we get away from things, we just, I guess it's not necessary anymore, so we don't
we don't think about it and we don't practice it.
we don't go. So back when I'm teaching guys, it is, you know, I've studied, you know, how these guys did all their stuff, and when I was out in the desert or wherever I was, you know, especially in the desert, whether it was the Middle East or other parts of the world, their skills still apply today.
Yeah.
You know, again,
And we teach it.
airing down tires, you
Yes.
know, recoveries, reading terrain, reading the sand dunes, looking, you know, for when can you go, what the lee side to windward side, you know, all that stuff that these guys did by trial and error. And if they messed up, I mean, the longest one, one of these guys, they got ambushed, everything else. They walked 200 miles in the desert.
I can't even imagine.
I know, you know, with very little gear and very little water and finding stuff. So again, it's, you know, a lot of lessons learned. And so where the modification started, almost the moment they came off the line. Actually, once they got into the field, they were great. Again, everything is great until you get it in the field.
And you start using them.
Then you start using, and you're like, okay, things we didn't think of. Nobody thinks of. Again, who would have thought you're going to use Jeeps to attack aircraft on an airfield?
Now, today, if we fast forward to like this current generation of Jeeps.
Yes.
Now, this is what I've heard. I think I saw a video on this when they first released the new JLs
Yep.
and the JTs and all that, the Gladiators and the other. I think now, if I'm not mistaken, they actually allowed some of the vendors that do the aftermarket products, they come out and take a look at the Jeep before
Yep.
they make it go public.
Yep.
So they can go ahead and get their specs and do this and know what they want to do and get everything they need to do.
Right.
But so when they release the Jeep to the public, they're already
Yes.
they've got their
They've got
machines
Yes.
ready to go
Yes.
to build those.
Yes.
Those. I think that's how they do it now, isn't it? They invite them
that's
in.
that's your prototypes that you're seeing.
Yeah.
Or concepts.
Well, these are. I think these are actually the ones that are going into production, so they
Right.
get the exact measurements
Yep.
of
Exactly.
everything. So
Whenever they
that's
get all the stamps and molds
Right.
and everything else
Yep.
is set,
Yeah.
then that's when they bring it out.
so instead of waiting until it used to be, like
You'd
with
have
the
to wait
TJs,
until it comes
the
out.
TJ would be out and they'd be like, all right, let's take
Yeah,
a look. We
yeah,
got one
yeah.
here, and then go ahead and build it.
No.
It takes months to design
Yes.
it, to go through trial and
Yes.
error, and then this allows them to do that
Oh, yeah.
beforehand.
Well, a lot of it too is it's all CAD designed, so they can actually send those files of the certain areas that they're wanting to look at.
Yes, yeah.
Instead of actually having to have
When you say CAD, you mean?
computer aided draft.
Okay, there we go. I'm just trying to
No,
keep
no,
it-
Educate, yeah.
keeping it real
Right.
for everybody,
Yeah.
you know, because I did not know either. That's why, what do you mean by CAD? Right. So okay, so it's computer generated basically, and they
Yes.
give you all of that information, but you still get to go there, measure
Yes.
everything, take
Measured
a
up
look at it.
Yeah, because I mean, in a CAD, you can only get so much because it'll say a radius of an inch,
Mm-hmm.
and it might be a little bit different
Right.
with the part that you're putting in there. So, yeah. But
There's
at
other
least
things to take in consideration, and those are for the engineers when they go there and
Yeah.
look at them. It's all way above our pay grade.
Yes.
These guys. Who
I
are
understand
designed-
it, though.
Yeah, but you do.
Yeah.
You do get it. So
Oh,
you
for the boating, when you guys did everything back in
Yeah.
the boating,
Yeah.
you guys built everything.
Except we did those off of paper plans.
Yes.
And then we built it from there. So it's
That's it's quite the the research. If you could really find any kind of you go down. You know how Bart, you always say you're going down that YouTube rabbit hole, or
Yes.
social media rabbit hole.
Yep.
You can find that
Yes.
kind of information out if you keep digging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it that time?
I think it is that time.
We'll do that. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Hey, you see that idiot?
What the hell are you doing?
What are you doing?
What you think you're doing, you stupid idiot?
It's the Off-Road Toolbox Tool of the Day.
Are you some kind of moron?
Today, our tool of the day is not a bad tool of the day. It comes from, again, doing research. So one of the people there's another training group, and they're over on the West Coast. It's called Badlands Off-Road Adventures. And like we always do our little talks on preparedness when you're driving your vehicle, and so they did one because of they're out west, and things we don't consider is wildfires.
We had wildfires for 1 year.
1998, the whole state of Florida.
Whole
Every
state of
67, was on fire, and that was interesting.
But out there, it's constant.
And it moves so fast. And the picture you're showing now, those at the time when I was writing this report were the reported wildfires that were being fought
On the West Coast.
on the West Coast. It's just amazing. So, like we have days to prepare for a hurricane, but you don't have necessarily days to prepare for a wildfire. Depends on how close you are, where you
where
are.
it starts and how close you are to it.
And so there's times that whole towns or cities have to evacuate and get out of it. That's the whole United States. That's not look. I mean, if you look at Canada, I mean, some of the areas not populated in Canada or Alaska, but if you look at the lower 48, and then if you look on the other side where it's all green, that's all flood from Hurricane Donna. So between floods and hurricanes, so
Debbie.
Correction, Debbie. When you have an event, and these guys put out a nice article about, hey, if you're going to deal with forest fires and you have to bug out, you need to have some essential gear. You need to have it in your vehicle, or if they call it a bug out bag. If you have a bag and some gear and stuff, everything, you need to throw it in your vehicle and you need to move.
And we've talked about that in the past.
We have,
You know.
but it was so interesting that he actually dedicated his whole
So who's the tool?
the people who don't listen.
Okay.
The people who don't listen, and there's great advice, whether if it's from us, from Badlands Off-Road Adventures, they put out a great news article. It's just amazing of what, again, having a plan, following it, getting ready. And if you live in those areas, when the fire is a half a mile from your house is not the time to start packing.
No, because it'll be on with you in a couple minutes.
Yes, and fires can move fast. I mean, look at the ones in California. The fire was moving at over 60 miles an hour.
Yep.
It's just crazy stuff. So
Exactly.
All right.
with that,
We appreciate y'all tuning in, and we look forward to having you guys back. So we'll see you real soon.
thank you.
And there you have it. Don't you feel smarter now? We'll drop more knowledge on you soon. Thanks for listening to the Off-Road Toolbox. Powered by Best Price Trailers.